Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate that while the primary objective of the ethical hacking engagement is to identify exploitable vulnerabilities within the client's web application, there is a critical need to avoid any actions that could lead to service disruption or data loss on the production environment. The engagement scope explicitly excludes any form of denial of service, DoS, testing, or direct manipulation of production data. Which of the following approaches best aligns with these requirements and ethical hacking best practices? Option A. Initiate a series of brute force login attempts against administrative interfaces and attempt to upload malicious payloads to identify potential code injection vulnerabilities, prioritizing depth of exploitation over potential system impact. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive suite of active vulnerability scans, including those that attempt to trigger error conditions or probe for known exploits, while closely monitoring system performance to halt if any degradation is observed. Option C. Perform network-level reconnaissance to identify all connected systems, and then attempt to gain access to any systems that appear to be part of the client's infrastructure, even if they are outside the explicitly defined web application scope. Option D. Focus on passive reconnaissance techniques, analyze publicly available information, and perform non-intrusive vulnerability scanning of the web application's attack surface, documenting any potential weaknesses without attempting to exploit them. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive suite of active vulnerability scans, including those that attempt to trigger error conditions or probe for known exploits, while closely monitoring system performance to halt if any degradation is observed. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for thoroughness with the constraints of a defined scope and potential impact on live systems. The professional challenge lies in identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by malicious actors without causing disruption or violating the agreed-upon boundaries of the engagement. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the testing remains within the authorized scope while still providing meaningful insights into the organization's security posture. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres strictly to the established scope of work and prioritizes minimizing risk to the client's operations. This aligns with the ethical obligation of an ethical hacker to act responsibly and avoid causing harm. By focusing on techniques that are less likely to cause service disruption, such as passive reconnaissance and non-intrusive vulnerability scanning, the ethical hacker demonstrates a commitment to professional integrity and client trust. This approach also implicitly respects the client's business continuity requirements, a key consideration in any penetration testing engagement. An incorrect approach that involves aggressive, unauthorized scanning of systems outside the agreed-upon scope represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such actions could be construed as unauthorized access, potentially violating laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act (CFA) in the U.S. or similar legislation in other jurisdictions. Ethically, it breaches the trust placed in the ethical hacker and could lead to legal repercussions for both the individual and the client. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to exploit vulnerabilities without prior explicit authorization, even if within scope, carries a high risk of unintended consequences, including data loss or system downtime. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential impact on the client's business operations, which is a fundamental ethical failing. Professionals should approach such situations by meticulously reviewing and adhering to the statement of work and the rules of engagement (RO). They should maintain open communication with the client regarding any potential ambiguities or areas where the scope might need clarification. Before employing any testing technique, a risk assessment should be performed to evaluate its potential impact. If a technique carries a high risk of disruption, it should only be used with explicit, documented client approval, or alternative, less intrusive methods should be explored. Question 2. Analysis of a scenario where a certified ethical hacker, during a penetration test, discovers a database containing highly sensitive personal identifiable information, PI, that was not explicitly within the defined scope of the engagement. The hacker has the technical capability to exfiltrate this data to demonstrate the severity of the vulnerability. What is the most ethically and professionally sound course of action? Option A. Exfiltrate a sample of the sensitive data to a secure, encrypted location to use as irrefutable proof of the vulnerability for the client's immediate attention. Option B. Immediately cease any further access to the sensitive data, document the discovery and its location, and report it to the designated client contact as per the agreed-upon communication protocols in the statement of work. Option C. Continue with the planned penetration test activities, making a note to report the discovery of the sensitive data in the final report without immediate notification. Option D. Share the discovered sensitive data with a trusted cybersecurity colleague for a second opinion on the best way to secure it before reporting to the client. Correct answer is B. Immediately cease any further access to the sensitive data, document the discovery and its location, and report it to the designated client contact as per the agreed-upon communication protocols in the statement of work. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, where the discovery of sensitive data during a penetration test raises immediate questions about reporting and handling. The ethical hacker must balance the contractual scope of the engagement with the ethical and legal obligations to report and secure potentially compromised information. The professional challenge lies in navigating the gray areas between authorized testing and unauthorized data access, ensuring that actions taken are both effective in identifying vulnerabilities and compliant with established ethical and legal frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately ceasing the data exfiltration, documenting the discovery, and reporting it to the designated point of contact within the client organization, adhering strictly to the agreed-upon communication protocols outlined in the statement of work. This aligns with the ethical hacking principle of minimizing harm and acting with integrity. By ceasing exfiltration, the hacker avoids further unauthorized data handling. Documenting the discovery provides evidence for the client. Reporting to the designated contact ensures that the client is made aware of the critical vulnerability in a controlled manner, allowing them to take immediate remediation steps. This approach respects the client's ownership of the data and the boundaries of the penetration test, while fulfilling the ethical obligation to disclose critical findings. This is consistent with the CEH v13 emphasis on ethical conduct and responsible disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. Continuing to exfiltrate the data, even for the purpose of demonstrating the vulnerability, constitutes a breach of trust and potentially violates data privacy regulations. This action moves beyond authorized testing into unauthorized data acquisition, which can have severe legal and reputational consequences for both the hacker and the client. It demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's data and a failure to adhere to the principle of least privilege. Sharing the discovered sensitive data with a third party, even for the purpose of seeking advice or raising awareness, is a severe ethical and legal violation. This action breaches confidentiality agreements and exposes the client to significant risks of data leakage and identity theft. It directly contravenes the ethical hacker's duty to protect client information. Ignoring the discovery and continuing with the penetration test without reporting it is also professionally unacceptable. While the data might not have been exfiltrated, the vulnerability remains unaddressed, leaving the client exposed. This failure to disclose critical findings is a dereliction of duty and an ethical lapse, as the primary goal of a penetration test is to identify and report such risks to enable remediation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Immediately halt any action that could be construed as unauthorized data access or exfiltration. 2. Thoroughly document the nature of the sensitive data discovered and the method of discovery. 3. Consult the SOW and any relevant non-disclosure agreements, NDA, to understand contractual obligations regarding data handling and reporting. 4. Report the findings immediately to the designated point of contact as per the SOW, using secure and agreed-upon communication channels. 5. Follow the client's instructions for remediation and further investigation, always operating within the scope of the engagement. 6. Maintain strict confidentiality regarding all discovered information. Question 3. The assessment process reveals that while a verbal agreement for a penetration test has been reached with a key stakeholder, no formal written contract or statement of work has been signed. The stakeholder has indicated that the ethical hacker should look for vulnerabilities wherever you think they might be. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and ethically sound course of action for the ethical hacker? Option A. Immediately cease all testing activities and request a formal written authorization that clearly defines the scope, objectives, and limitations of the engagement before proceeding. Option B. Proceed with the penetration test based on the verbal agreement and the stakeholders' general instruction, assuming that wherever you think they might be implies broad permission. Option C. Interpret the organization's existing IT security policy as implicit authorization for conducting the penetration test, as it outlines general security responsibilities. Option D. Begin testing systems that appear to be less critical to the organization's operations, as this minimizes the risk of causing significant disruption while still gathering some data. The correct answer is A. Immediately cease all testing activities and request a formal written authorization that clearly defines the scope, objectives, and limitations of the engagement before proceeding. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for comprehensive testing with the potential impact on business operations and the privacy of individuals. The scenario requires an ethical hacker to consider not only technical vulnerabilities, but also the broader implications of their actions, aligning with the principles of responsible disclosure and minimizing harm. This involves understanding the organization's risk tolerance, the sensitivity of the data being accessed, and the potential for disruption. The correct approach prioritizes obtaining explicit, written authorization that clearly defines the scope, objectives, and limitations of the penetration test. This aligns with the ethical hacking principle of operating within legal and authorized boundaries. Specifically, under the general ethical guidelines and best practices expected of a certified ethical hacker, unauthorized access or testing, even with good intentions, constitutes a violation. The Certified Ethical Hacker Code of Ethics emphasizes acting with integrity, honesty, and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. Obtaining clear, documented consent ensures that the ethical hacker is acting legally and with the organization's full knowledge and agreement, thereby mitigating legal risks and maintaining professional credibility. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with testing based on a verbal agreement. This lacks the necessary documentation to prove authorization, leaving the ethical hacker vulnerable to accusations of unauthorized access if the scope is misunderstood or if the engagement sours. This directly violates the principle of operating within authorized parameters and could lead to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret a general IT security policy as implicit permission for any testing deemed necessary. While IT security policies are important, they typically do not grant blanket authorization for penetration testing without specific, project-based approval. This approach risks exceeding the intended scope of the policy and performing unauthorized activities. Finally, assuming that testing systems that appear to be less critical is acceptable without explicit authorization is a dangerous assumption. The definition of critical can be subjective, and even seemingly minor systems can have significant downstream impacts or contain sensitive data. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence in confirming authorization and scope, leading to potential ethical and legal breaches. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Confirm authorization. Always obtain explicit, written authorization before commencing any testing activities. This document should detail the scope, objectives, timelines, and any specific restrictions. 2. Define scope clearly. Work with stakeholders to precisely define what systems, networks, and applications are in scope, and importantly, what is out of scope. 3. Understand objectives. Clarify the primary goals of the assessment to ensure the testing methodology aligns with desired outcomes. 4. Risk assessment. Consider the potential impact of testing on business operations and data privacy, and plan accordingly to minimize disruption. 5. Communication. Maintain open and regular communication with the client or sponsoring organization throughout the assessment. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that organizations are increasingly concerned about insider threats, even when direct data exfiltration is not immediately evident. During a penetration test, an ethical hacker discovers a misconfiguration that, while not directly allowing access to sensitive data, could be used by an insider to gain elevated privileges or bypass logging mechanisms for future unauthorized actions. What is the most professional and ethical course of action for the ethical hacker? Option A. Document the misconfiguration, assess its potential impact on future unauthorized activities, and report it to the designated client contact with recommendations for remediation. Option B. Directly confront the employee suspected of potentially exploiting this misconfiguration to understand their intentions. Option C. Ignore the misconfiguration as it does not directly lead to data exfiltration, which is the primary objective of the penetration test. Option D. Report the misconfiguration solely to the junior technical staff responsible for system administration, assuming they will handle it. Correct answer is A. Document the misconfiguration, assess its potential impact on future unauthorized activities, and report it to the designated client contact with recommendations for remediation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, where the ethical hacker discovers a vulnerability that, while not directly exploitable for immediate data theft, could be leveraged by an insider to bypass security controls for future malicious activity. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate reporting of a discovered flaw with the potential for delayed or indirect harm, and the need to communicate the risk effectively to stakeholders who may not have a deep technical understanding. The ethical hacker must consider the potential impact on the organization's reputation, financial stability, and legal standing, all while adhering to the scope of engagement and professional conduct. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough risk assessment and clear, actionable communication to the appropriate stakeholders. This aligns with the principles of responsible disclosure and professional ethics expected of a certified ethical hacker. The ethical hacker has a duty to report all findings, especially those that represent a potential security risk, regardless of immediate exploitability. Documenting the vulnerability, its potential impact, and recommending remediation steps is crucial. Presenting this information to management or designated security personnel, rather than directly to the individual who might exploit it, ensures that the organization can address the risk systematically and prevent potential misuse. This approach prioritizes the organization's security posture and adheres to the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the client. Incorrect approach is analysis. Ignoring the vulnerability because it cannot be immediately exploited for data exfiltration is a significant ethical and professional failure. This neglects the principle of due diligence and the responsibility to identify and report all security weaknesses. It also fails to consider the evolving threat landscape and the possibility of future exploitation. Directly confronting the employee without proper authorization or a structured reporting process is also professionally unacceptable. This could lead to legal repercussions for the ethical hacker, damage the client relationship, and potentially alert the insider without the organization being prepared to mitigate the risk. It bypasses established incident response protocols and could be perceived as overstepping the bounds of the engagement. Reporting the vulnerability only to the technical team without escalating to management or relevant decision-makers might result in the finding being deprioritized or overlooked due to resource constraints or differing risk appetites. While the technical team is essential, ensuring that the business impact is understood and that appropriate resources are allocated for remediation requires communication at a higher level. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that prioritizes clear communication, risk assessment, and adherence to established protocols. When a potential vulnerability is discovered, the ethical hacker should 1. Document the finding thoroughly, including steps to reproduce and potential impact. 2. Assess the risk based on the likelihood and impact of exploitation, considering both immediate and future scenarios. 3. Consult the engagement scope and any predefined reporting procedures. 4. Communicate the findings and recommended remediation to the designated point of contact or management, providing a clear explanation of the risks in business terms. 5. Avoid direct confrontation or unauthorized actions that could jeopardize the engagement or the client's security. 6. Maintain professional objectivity and focus on the organization's overall security posture. Question 5. Research into the findings of a recent penetration test reveals several critical vulnerabilities that could lead to significant data breaches and operational disruptions. The ethical hacker is preparing to present these findings to various stakeholders, including the executive board, IT management, and legal counsel. Considering the diverse technical understanding and responsibilities of these groups, what is the most professional and ethically sound approach to communicating these findings? Option A. Prepare a comprehensive executive summary that outlines the overall risk posture, key vulnerabilities, and their potential business impact, followed by detailed technical reports for IT management and specific risk assessments for legal counsel. Option B. Deliver a raw, uninterpreted dump of all technical findings and logs directly to all stakeholders, assuming they can interpret the data themselves. Option C. Exaggerate the severity of all findings to ensure the urgency of remediation is understood by all stakeholders. Option D. Withhold the most critical findings from the executive board to avoid causing undue alarm and only present less severe issues. The correct answer is A. Prepare a comprehensive executive summary that outlines the overall risk posture, key vulnerabilities, and their potential business impact, followed by detailed technical reports for IT management and specific risk assessments for legal counsel. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, where the technical findings of a penetration test directly impact business operations and stakeholder confidence. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to disclose critical vulnerabilities with the potential for causing alarm or disruption to the organization's stakeholders, including investors, customers, and employees. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the communication of findings is both effective and responsible. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes clear, concise, and actionable communication tailored to the specific audience by providing a tiered summary of findings, starting with a high-level executive overview and then offering detailed technical reports. The ethical hacker demonstrates an understanding of different stakeholder needs and their varying levels of technical expertise. This approach ensures that decision-makers can grasp the severity of the risks without being overwhelmed by technical jargon, enabling them to allocate resources effectively for remediation. This aligns with the ethical hacker's responsibility to provide valuable insights that contribute to the organization's security posture, fostering trust and transparency. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on delivering raw, uninterpreted technical data without context fails to meet the needs of non-technical stakeholders. This can lead to misinterpretation of risks, delayed decision-making, and a general lack of understanding regarding the business impact of the vulnerabilities. Ethically, this approach neglects the duty to communicate findings in a manner that is comprehensible and actionable for all relevant parties. Another incorrect approach that involves withholding critical findings due to fear of negative repercussions or stakeholder backlash is a direct violation of ethical principles and professional responsibility. Transparency and honesty are paramount in ethical hacking. Concealing significant risks undermines the purpose of the engagement and can lead to severe consequences for the organization if those vulnerabilities are exploited. This constitutes a failure to uphold professional integrity. A further incorrect approach that involves sensationalizing findings to create a sense of urgency without providing a balanced perspective can also be detrimental. While urgency is sometimes necessary, exaggeration can lead to panic, misallocation of resources towards less critical issues, and a loss of credibility for the ethical hacker. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a commitment to factual reporting, objective risk assessment, and clear communication that empowers stakeholders to make informed decisions based on accurate information. The professional reasoning process should involve understanding the organization's risk appetite, the potential business impact of vulnerabilities, and the communication preferences of key stakeholders, all while adhering to the ethical code of conduct. Question 6. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of the client's business objectives and the legal and ethical boundaries of an ethical hacking engagement. When tasked with assessing the security posture of a financial institution, which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to professional ethical standards and regulatory compliance within the United States? Option A. Obtaining explicit written authorization from the Chief Information Security Officer (CISO) or a designated executive, clearly defining the scope, objectives, and limitations of the engagement, and adhering strictly to these parameters. Option B. Conducting a limited set of passive reconnaissance activities and reporting potential risks without performing any active testing, citing concerns about potential disruption to financial transactions. Option C. Initiating penetration testing activities immediately upon receiving a verbal agreement from a mid-level IT manager to identify vulnerabilities before formal documentation is finalized. Option D. Proceeding with a broad range of vulnerability scans and exploitation attempts across the entire network infrastructure, assuming the client wants a comprehensive assessment without explicitly defining the scope. The correct answer is C. Initiating penetration testing activities immediately upon receiving a verbal agreement from a mid-level IT manager to identify vulnerabilities before formal documentation is finalized. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for comprehensive testing with the potential impact on business operations and the trust of stakeholders. The ethical hacker must navigate the complexities of obtaining explicit authorization, understanding the scope of engagement, and ensuring that testing activities do not inadvertently cause harm or violate privacy. The professional challenge lies in the inherent tension between aggressive security testing and the operational realities of the client's business. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes clear, documented consent and a well-defined scope of work. This aligns with the ethical hacking principle of authorized access and responsible disclosure. By obtaining explicit permission from the appropriate authority and adhering strictly to the agreed-upon scope, the ethical hacker demonstrates professionalism, minimizes legal and reputational risks for both parties, and builds trust. This proactive communication and adherence to agreed-upon boundaries are fundamental to maintaining ethical conduct and professional integrity, as expected within the CEH v13 framework, which emphasizes responsible and authorized security assessments. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with testing without explicit, documented authorization from the highest relevant authority is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This constitutes unauthorized access, which is illegal and unethical, potentially leading to severe legal repercussions and damage to the ethical hacker's reputation and the client's business. Another incorrect approach, such as testing beyond the agreed-upon scope without prior notification and consent, also represents a breach of trust and professional ethics. It can lead to unintended consequences, operational disruptions, and legal liabilities, violating the principle of working within defined boundaries and respecting client agreements. A third incorrect approach, failing to document all testing activities and findings, hinders transparency and accountability. This lack of documentation can impede post-engagement analysis, remediation efforts, and can be a critical issue in legal or compliance audits, failing to meet the standards of thoroughness and accountability expected in professional security assessments. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and constraints. This involves clearly defining the scope of work, identifying all relevant stakeholders, and obtaining explicit, written authorization from the highest appropriate authority within the client organization. Throughout the engagement, continuous communication and adherence to the agreed-upon plan are crucial. Any deviations or discoveries outside the scope should be immediately reported and discussed with the client for further authorization. Post-engagement, a comprehensive and accurate report detailing findings, methodologies, and recommendations is essential for transparency and effective remediation. Question 7. Governance review demonstrates that the organization has recently undergone a significant digital transformation, introducing new cloud-based services and EOT devices. As a certified ethical hacker, you have completed a comprehensive penetration test and identified a range of vulnerabilities, from low-severity misconfigurations to critical remote code execution flaws. Considering the diverse stakeholders involved, including the CISO, the head of IT operations, and the board of directors, what is the most professional and effective approach to reporting your findings? Option A. Focus the report on the most critical vulnerabilities, downplaying or omitting less severe findings to avoid overwhelming the stakeholders and to present a more positive overall security posture. Option B. Prioritize the identified vulnerabilities based on their potential business impact and technical severity, and then develop tailored executive summaries and detailed technical reports for specific stakeholder groups, ensuring clear communication of risks and recommended actions. Option C. Present a detailed technical report to all stakeholders, outlining every identified vulnerability with its corresponding CVSS score and technical remediation steps, allowing each stakeholder to interpret the information as they see fit. Option D. Immediately escalate all findings, regardless of severity, to the highest levels of management and the board, demanding immediate action on every single identified issue to mitigate any potential future breach. The correct answer is C. Present a detailed technical report to all stakeholders, outlining every identified vulnerability with its corresponding CVSS score and technical remediation steps, allowing each stakeholder to interpret the information as they see fit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the ethical hacker must balance the need for thoroughness and accuracy in their findings with the potential for causing undue alarm or reputational damage to the organization. The stakeholder perspective is crucial here, as different stakeholders will have varying levels of technical understanding and different priorities. The ethical hacker's responsibility extends beyond simply identifying vulnerabilities. It includes communicating those risks effectively and responsibly to the appropriate parties. The correct approach, which involves prioritizing findings based on potential impact and tailoring communication to specific stakeholder groups, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the ethical principles of responsible disclosure and professional conduct expected of certified ethical hackers. By categorizing vulnerabilities and presenting them in a manner understandable to each stakeholder, the ethical hacker facilitates informed decision-making and resource allocation for remediation. This proactive and considerate communication strategy minimizes disruption while ensuring critical issues are addressed, thereby upholding the trust placed in the ethical hacking profession. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on presenting all raw technical data without context or prioritization would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of understanding of stakeholder needs and an inability to translate technical findings into actionable business intelligence. Such an approach could overwhelm stakeholders, leading to confusion, inaction, or misinterpretation of risks, potentially violating ethical obligations to provide clear and useful information. Another incorrect approach, which involves withholding critical findings due to fear of negative repercussions or a desire to present a clean report, represents a severe ethical failure. This directly contravenes the principle of honesty and integrity. It also poses a significant risk to the organization by leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed, potentially leading to a breach that could have been prevented. This approach prioritizes personal comfort over professional duty and organizational security. A third incorrect approach, which involves sensationalizing minor findings to appear more impactful, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and can erode trust with stakeholders. While it might create a sense of urgency, it misrepresents the true risk landscape and can lead to misallocation of resources towards less critical issues, diverting attention from more significant threats. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly analyze the identified vulnerabilities and their potential impact on the organization's assets and operations. Second, identify the key stakeholders and understand their roles, responsibilities, and technical comprehension levels. Third, develop a communication strategy that prioritizes findings based on risk and tailors the language and detail to each stakeholder group. Finally, ensure all reporting is accurate, objective, and actionable, adhering to ethical guidelines and professional standards. Question 8. Which approach would be most appropriate for an ethical hacker tasked with assessing the security posture of a financial institution when they discover a critical vulnerability that could expose customer financial data, but the initial scope of engagement did not explicitly cover this specific type of vulnerability? Option A. Immediately exploit the vulnerability to gather as much evidence as possible to demonstrate its severity to the client. Option B. Immediately report the vulnerability to regulatory bodies without informing the client first. Option C. Cease all further testing in that area and document the finding, then await further instructions from the client before proceeding. Option D. Attempt to gain unauthorized access to customer data to prove the extent of the breach. The correct answer is A. Immediately exploit the vulnerability to gather as much evidence as possible to demonstrate its severity to the client. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the long-term implications of data handling and the potential for legal repercussions. The ethical hacker must consider not only the technical feasibility of obtaining data, but also the legal and ethical boundaries governing its acquisition and use. Careful judgment is required to ensure that actions taken are both effective and compliant with established frameworks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes obtaining explicit consent and adhering to established legal and ethical guidelines. This aligns with the principles of responsible disclosure and data privacy, which are fundamental in cybersecurity. By seeking authorization and following documented procedures, the ethical hacker demonstrates professionalism and mitigates risks associated with unauthorized access or data misuse. This proactive stance ensures that the engagement remains within legal and ethical boundaries, fostering trust with stakeholders and preventing potential legal liabilities. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing security controls without explicit authorization, even if for the purpose of demonstrating vulnerability, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action could be construed as unauthorized access, violating laws such as the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFA, in the U.S., or similar legislation in other jurisdictions. Ethically, it breaches the principle of consent and could lead to a loss of trust with the client. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately sharing findings with external parties without proper channels, would violate confidentiality agreements and potentially expose sensitive information, leading to severe legal and reputational damage. This disregards the ethical obligation to protect client data and could contravene data protection regulations like GDPR if applicable. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on technical exploitation, without considering the broader impact on the organization's operations or reputation, demonstrates a lack of holistic risk assessment and professional responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the scope of engagement and obtaining explicit, written authorization. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment, considering legal, ethical, and operational implications. Communication with stakeholders throughout the process is crucial, ensuring transparency and managing expectations. When vulnerabilities are discovered, a structured reporting mechanism that prioritizes remediation and adheres to responsible disclosure principles should be followed. This systematic approach ensures that ethical hacking activities are conducted legally, ethically, and effectively, contributing to the overall security posture of the organization. Question 9. The review process indicates that during a penetration test, a significant vulnerability was discovered that could allow unauthorized access to sensitive customer data. The engagement contract clearly outlines a communication plan, designating a specific project manager as the primary point of contact for all findings, and requiring a formal written report for all discovered vulnerabilities. The ethical hacker has direct contact information for the client's Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, and the lead IT security analyst. Which of the following actions best represents the ethically and professionally responsible approach to reporting this critical finding? Option A. Bypass the project manager and directly email the CISO with a detailed technical explanation of the vulnerability and a proposed remediation strategy. Option B. Immediately inform the client's project manager via email, detailing the vulnerability and its potential impact, and request a meeting to discuss remediation steps. Option C. Document the vulnerability thoroughly but wait until the final penetration test report is compiled to disclose it to the project manager. Option D. Contact the lead IT security analyst directly to explain the vulnerability, as they are the most technically equipped to understand and address it. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the client's project manager via email, detailing the vulnerability and its potential impact, and request a meeting to discuss remediation steps. Explanation. The review process indicates a critical juncture in a penetration testing engagement where the ethical hacker has discovered a significant vulnerability that could have far-reaching implications for client data confidentiality and integrity. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to report the finding with the established communication protocols and the potential for misinterpretation or premature action by the client's stakeholders. This scenario demands careful judgment to ensure that the discovery is communicated effectively, responsibly, and in a manner that facilitates a constructive remediation process, rather than causing undue alarm or compromising the ongoing testing. The correct approach involves adhering to the established communication plan and reporting the vulnerability through the designated channels to the appropriate client representative. This aligns with best professional practices by respecting the client's organizational structure and reporting lines, ensuring that information is disseminated to those authorized to act upon it. It also upholds ethical obligations by providing a clear, documented, and actionable report. This method ensures that the client can initiate their incident response procedures in a controlled manner, minimizing potential panic, and allowing for a coordinated technical and business response. This is consistent with the principles of responsible disclosure and professional conduct expected of certified ethical hackers. An incorrect approach of immediately escalating the finding to a high-level executive without following the agreed-upon reporting structure is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established communication channels, potentially undermining the client's internal processes and creating confusion. It could be seen as a breach of trust and a failure to adhere to the agreed scope and methodology of the engagement. Ethically, it could lead to premature and potentially misinformed decisions by executives who may not have the full technical context. Another incorrect approach of withholding the critical vulnerability information until the final report is also professionally unsound. The final report is a crucial deliverable. Withholding critical, immediate threats to the client's security for an extended period, especially if the testing is ongoing, is an ethical lapse. It fails to provide the client with timely awareness of a significant risk, potentially exposing them to harm. This contradicts the ethical imperative to act in the best interest of the client and to prevent harm. Finally, an incorrect approach of directly contacting the IT security team without informing the primary point of contact or following the agreed reporting mechanism is also problematic. While the IT security team is a relevant stakeholder, bypassing the agreed-upon communication flow can disrupt the client's internal coordination and may not be the most effective way to ensure the information reaches the decision-makers who can authorize remediation efforts. It can create an impression of unprofessionalism and a lack of respect for the client's established operational procedures. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the engagement scope, objectives, and, crucially, the agreed-upon communication plan. When a significant finding is made, the ethical hacker should first consult the engagement documentation to identify the designated reporting channels and points of contact. If the communication plan is unclear, or if the finding presents an immediate and severe risk that warrants expedited communication, the ethical hacker should attempt to contact their primary liaison to discuss the best course of action. Transparency and adherence to agreed-upon processes are paramount, ensuring that findings are reported responsibly and effectively. Question 10. The analysis reveals that during a penetration test, an ethical hacker discovers a critical zero-day vulnerability in a widely used third-party software component integrated into the client's network. The client has explicitly requested that the engagement focus solely on their internal infrastructure and has a strict non-disclosure agreement in place regarding any findings. The ethical hacker is aware that public disclosure of this vulnerability could significantly impact numerous organizations, but also understands that immediate reporting to the third-party vendor might exceed the agreed-upon scope and potentially violate the client's NDA if not handled carefully. What is the most ethically and professionally sound course of action for the ethical hacker? Option A. Document the vulnerability thoroughly and report it directly to the client, advising them on the risks and recommending they contact the third-party vendor for remediation, while respecting the NDA and scope. Option B. Immediately report the vulnerability to the third-party vendor and relevant cybersecurity authorities, prioritizing public safety over the client's NDA and scope of engagement. Option C. Ignore the vulnerability as it falls outside the defined scope of the penetration test and could jeopardize the client relationship if reported. Option D. Publicly disclose the vulnerability on security forums to alert the broader community and encourage rapid patching by the vendor and other affected parties. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the vulnerability to the third-party vendor and relevant cybersecurity authorities, prioritizing public safety over the client's NDA and scope of engagement. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where an ethical hacker discovers a critical vulnerability during a penetration test. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to report the vulnerability to the client for remediation with the potential for the client to misuse or suppress the information, especially if the vulnerability impacts a third-party product or service. Ethical hacking, particularly within the context of the CEH v13 framework, emphasizes responsible disclosure and adherence to legal and ethical boundaries. The professional must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that their actions do not inadvertently cause harm or violate any agreements. The correct approach involves a structured decision-making process that prioritizes client communication, adherence to the scope of engagement, and responsible disclosure principles. This aligns with the ethical guidelines of professional hacking, which mandate transparency, integrity, and a commitment to improving security. By following a clear protocol, the ethical hacker ensures that their actions are defensible, ethical, and legally sound, protecting both themselves and the client. Incorrect approaches often stem from a lack of adherence to established protocols or a misunderstanding of ethical obligations. For instance, immediately disclosing the vulnerability publicly without client consent or attempting to exploit it further for personal gain would be a severe ethical and potentially legal breach. Similarly, withholding the information due to fear of repercussions or client dissatisfaction undermines the core purpose of ethical hacking, which is to identify and help mitigate risks. These actions can lead to reputational damage, legal liabilities, and a breakdown of trust between the ethical hacker and their clients. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that includes understanding the scope of the engagement and any pre-existing agreements, identifying the nature and severity of the discovered vulnerability, communicating findings clearly and promptly to the designated point of contact within the client organization, recommending appropriate remediation steps, and adhering to responsible disclosure policies, which often involve allowing the client a reasonable time frame to address the issue before any public disclosure, if applicable and agreed upon. This systematic approach ensures that all stakeholders are informed and that the discovery is handled in a manner that maximizes security benefits while minimizing potential harm. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a critical vulnerability discovered during a penetration test, which could lead to unauthorized access to sensitive customer data, is being downplayed by a key executive who believes the remediation effort is too disruptive and costly. As the ethical hacker, what is the most professional and ethical course of action? Option A. Adjust the severity rating of the vulnerability in the report to a lower level to align with the executive's perception and avoid immediate conflict. Option B. Recommend a temporary workaround that mitigates the immediate exploitability but does not fully address the underlying vulnerability to satisfy the executive's desire for minimal disruption. Option C. Proceed with implementing a complex, full-scale remediation plan immediately, overriding the executive's concerns about disruption and cost. Option D. Document the vulnerability and its potential impact accurately in the final report, and schedule a follow-up meeting with the executive and relevant stakeholders to discuss the risks and potential remediation strategies collaboratively. The correct answer is D. Document the vulnerability and its potential impact accurately in the final report, and schedule a follow-up meeting with the executive and relevant stakeholders to discuss the risks and potential remediation strategies collaboratively. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, where a discovered vulnerability has the potential for significant impact, but the client's immediate reaction is to downplay its severity due to perceived inconvenience or cost of remediation. The ethical hacker is caught between their professional obligation to report findings accurately and the client's desire to avoid disruption. This requires careful judgment to ensure the client understands the true risk without alienating them or overstepping professional boundaries. The challenge lies in balancing technical accuracy with effective communication and risk management. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves clearly and objectively communicating the potential impact of the vulnerability, supported by evidence gathered during the assessment. This aligns with the ethical hacker's responsibility to provide a comprehensive and accurate report of findings. Best professional practice dictates that the ethical hacker should not alter their findings to suit the client's preferences, but rather educate them on the risks. This upholds the integrity of the ethical hacking process and ensures the client can make informed decisions about security investments. The certified ethical hacker, say code of ethics, emphasizes honesty, integrity, and the duty to protect the client's interests by providing accurate information, even when it's unwelcome. Incorrect approaches analysis. Minimizing the reported severity of the vulnerability to appease the client is a direct violation of professional integrity and honesty. This misrepresents the security posture of the organization and could lead to future breaches, making the ethical hacker complicit in the potential harm. It fails to uphold the duty to inform and protect the client, potentially leading to regulatory noncompliance if the organization is subject to data protection laws that require accurate risk assessment. Ignoring the client's feedback and proceeding with a full remediation plan without further discussion bypasses crucial client communication and collaboration. While the technical findings are valid, ethical hacking involves working with the client to understand their operational constraints and risk appetite. This approach can lead to wasted resources on remediation that doesn't align with business priorities or is technically infeasible, demonstrating a lack of client centricity and potentially damaging the professional relationship. Suggesting a workaround that doesn't fully address the root cause of the vulnerability solely to avoid immediate remediation costs is also professionally unsound. This creates technical debt and leaves the organization exposed to future attacks. It prioritizes short-term convenience over long-term security, which is contrary to the ethical hacker's mandate to improve the client's security posture. This can lead to a false sense of security and potential regulatory scrutiny if the underlying vulnerability is later exploited. Professional reasoning. Professionals should utilize a structured decision-making framework that prioritizes accurate reporting, clear communication, and collaborative risk management. This involves 1. Documenting findings objectively with supporting evidence. 2. Clearly articulating the potential impact and risks to the client using business-relevant language. 3. Engaging in a dialogue with the client to understand their concerns and constraints. 4. Proposing remediation strategies that are technically sound, cost-effective, and aligned with the client's risk tolerance and business objectives. 5. Escalating concerns to appropriate stakeholders if the client refuses to address critical risks, while maintaining professional decorum. This approach ensures that ethical hacking services provide genuine value by enhancing security without compromising professional ethics or client relationships. Question 12. System analysis indicates a critical vulnerability has been discovered in a client's production environment that could lead to a complete system compromise. The vulnerability is easily exploitable, and the ethical hacker has the technical capability to exploit it and then implement a temporary fix to mitigate immediate risk before reporting. The hacker is also aware that a bug bounty program exists, offering a substantial reward for such discoveries. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately report the vulnerability through the established incident response and vulnerability disclosure channels, adhering to the agreed-upon reporting procedures. Option B. Ignore the vulnerability to avoid any potential legal or professional repercussions, as the discovery was not explicitly part of the authorized scope. Option C. Exploit the vulnerability to gain full administrative access, implement a temporary patch, and then report the findings and the patch. Option D. Report the vulnerability only after attempting to exploit it to demonstrate the severity and claim the bug bounty reward. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the vulnerability through the established incident response and vulnerability disclosure channels, adhering to the agreed-upon reporting procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in cybersecurity, where a discovered vulnerability could be exploited for significant gain by an adversary, but also offers a potential for rapid, albeit unauthorized, remediation. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to protect systems with the ethical and legal obligations to report vulnerabilities through proper channels. The ethical hacker must navigate the potential for personal gain against their professional duty to disclose findings responsibly, avoiding actions that could be construed as unauthorized access or exploitation, even with good intentions. The pressure to act quickly to prevent harm is high, but the established protocols for vulnerability disclosure are designed to ensure a controlled and authorized response. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately reporting the discovered vulnerability through the established incident response and vulnerability disclosure channels. This aligns with the ethical principles of responsible disclosure, which prioritize informing the affected organization so they can address the issue in a controlled manner. This practice is fundamental to professional cybersecurity conduct and is often implicitly or explicitly supported by industry, best practices, and ethical codes. It ensures that the organization is aware of the risk and can implement appropriate security measures, thereby protecting its assets and users without violating legal boundaries or professional ethics. This method upholds trust and accountability within the cybersecurity ecosystem. Incorrect approach is analysis, exploiting the vulnerability to gain further access, and then attempting to patch it without authorization is a significant ethical and legal failure. This constitutes unauthorized access and potentially unauthorized modification of systems, which is illegal and violates the core tenets of ethical hacking. It bypasses established security protocols and the organization's right to manage its own infrastructure. Furthermore, attempting to remediate without proper authorization can introduce new risks or mask the true extent of the vulnerability, hindering a comprehensive security response. Reporting the vulnerability only after attempting to exploit it for personal gain, even if the intention was to prove a point or secure a reward, is also professionally unacceptable. This prioritizes personal benefit or a misguided sense of justification over the immediate security of the organization and its stakeholders. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a disregard for the established ethical framework of responsible disclosure. The act of exploitation itself, regardless of subsequent reporting, carries ethical and legal ramifications. Ignoring the vulnerability to avoid potential complications or personal risk is a dereliction of professional duty. Ethical hackers are tasked with identifying and reporting security weaknesses. Failing to do so, especially when a significant risk is identified, can lead to severe consequences for the organization and its users, and it undermines the ethical commitment to improving security. This inaction is a failure to uphold the professional responsibility to protect information assets. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct, legal compliance, and responsible disclosure. This involves 1. Identify the ethical and legal implications of the discovery. 2. Consult established organizational policies and industry best practices for vulnerability reporting. 3. Prioritize immediate, authorized reporting through designated channels. 4. Avoid any actions that could be construed as unauthorized access, exploitation, or modification. 5. Document all findings and actions taken meticulously. 6. Seek guidance from senior colleagues or legal counsel if the situation is ambiguous. This structured approach ensures that actions are defensible, ethical, and contribute positively to the security posture of the organization. Question 13. During the evaluation of a web application's security posture, an ethical hacker discovers a potential cross-site scripting XSS vulnerability. While the technical exploit is straightforward, the application handles sensitive customer financial data and is a critical component of the organization's online services. Which of the following approaches best represents a professional and ethical response to this finding? Option A. Document the XSS vulnerability and its potential technical impact, then escalate to the client for further discussion on the acceptable level of risk and testing scope for exploitation. Option B. Proceed with a limited proof-of-concept exploit that only demonstrates the ability to inject a simple alert box without attempting to access or exfiltrate any sensitive data. Option C. Ignore the XSS vulnerability as it is a common finding and focus on more complex, less prevalent vulnerabilities. Option D. Immediately attempt to exploit the XSS vulnerability to demonstrate its full impact, including data exfiltration, to the client. The correct answer is D. Immediately attempt to exploit the XSS vulnerability to demonstrate its full impact, including data exfiltration, to the client. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for comprehensive testing with the potential for unintended disruption. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing the potential impact of a vulnerability before exploitation, ensuring that the testing process itself does not cause more harm than the vulnerability being investigated. This requires a deep understanding of the target system's criticality, the potential consequences of exploitation, and the organization's risk tolerance. Careful judgment is paramount to avoid unnecessary downtime, data loss, or reputational damage, which could have severe legal and financial repercussions. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough impact assessment, which is a cornerstone of responsible penetration testing and aligns with ethical hacking principles and best practices. This involves understanding the business context, identifying critical assets, and quantifying the potential damage a successful exploit could cause. By prioritizing vulnerabilities based on their potential impact, ethical hackers can focus their efforts on the most significant risks, providing actionable intelligence to the organization. This proactive and risk-based methodology is crucial for demonstrating value and maintaining client trust, as it directly addresses the organization's security posture in a way that minimizes collateral damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical exploitability without considering the business impact is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the exploitation of low-impact vulnerabilities while overlooking critical ones, or worse, causing significant disruption by exploiting a seemingly minor flaw in a critical system. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the organization's business objectives and risk appetite, which is a failure in professional judgment, and could lead to regulatory scrutiny if the testing process itself violates data protection or operational continuity regulations. Another incorrect approach that involves immediately exploiting any discovered vulnerability without prior authorization or impact assessment is highly unethical and illegal. It bypasses crucial risk management steps and can lead to severe consequences, including legal action and termination of engagement. It demonstrates a disregard for the client's trust and the potential harm caused by unauthorized actions. Finally, an approach that delays reporting significant findings due to a lack of understanding of their potential impact is also professionally deficient. While thoroughness is important, prolonged delays in reporting critical vulnerabilities can leave the organization exposed to real-world threats, negating the purpose of the engagement and potentially leading to breaches that could have been prevented. This highlights a failure in communication and risk prioritization. The professional reasoning process should involve a structured approach to impact assessment. This begins with understanding the client's business and critical assets. Next, identify potential vulnerabilities, and then, for each, hypothesize the potential consequences of exploitation. This should involve considering data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, as well as operational disruption and reputational damage. Finally, prioritize remediation efforts based on the assessed impact and likelihood of exploitation, ensuring that all actions are conducted within the agreed-upon scope and with explicit authorization. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a robust intrusion detection and prevention system, IPS, for critical customer data servers would incur significant upfront hardware and software costs, as well as ongoing maintenance expenses. However, the potential impact of a data breach on customer trust, regulatory fines, and business interruption is substantial. Given this, what is the most appropriate course of action for the cybersecurity professional? Option A. Recommend deferring the IPS implementation until a more favorable financial period, as the immediate costs outweigh the perceived benefits. Option B. Suggest implementing a less expensive, signature-based antivirus solution as a sufficient alternative to the IPS. Option C. Advise focusing solely on compliance requirements, implementing only the minimum security controls mandated by regulations, regardless of the actual risk exposure. Option D. Advocate for the implementation of the IPS, emphasizing the potential impact of a breach and aligning the investment with the organization's risk tolerance and regulatory obligations. Correct answer is D. Advocate for the implementation of the IPS, emphasizing the potential impact of a breach and aligning the investment with the organization's risk tolerance and regulatory obligations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity, where the perceived cost of implementing security controls is weighed against the potential impact of a security incident. The professional's task is to advocate for necessary security measures based on a thorough understanding of risk and potential business disruption, rather than solely on immediate financial outlays. The challenge lies in translating technical risks into business terms that resonate with stakeholders who may not have a deep technical background. The correct approach involves prioritizing security controls based on their effectiveness in mitigating the most significant risks identified during an impact assessment. This aligns with the principle of due diligence and the ethical obligation to protect an organization's assets and data. By focusing on the potential impact of a breach on business operations, reputation, and legal standing, the professional can justify the investment in security measures. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining business continuity and complying with relevant regulations that mandate reasonable security practices. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the need for enhanced security due to the upfront cost, without adequately considering the potential long-term financial and reputational damage of a successful attack. This demonstrates a failure to conduct a comprehensive impact assessment and a disregard for the organization's overall risk posture. Another incorrect approach would be to implement security controls in a haphazard manner, without a clear understanding of which risks they are intended to mitigate. This leads to inefficient resource allocation and leaves critical vulnerabilities unaddressed, violating the principle of proportionality in security investments. Furthermore, focusing solely on compliance checklists without understanding the underlying risks and impacts is a superficial approach that fails to provide genuine security. The professional decision-making process should involve a structured risk management framework. This begins with identifying critical assets and potential threats. Next, an impact assessment should be conducted to understand the potential consequences of a successful attack on these assets, considering financial loss, operational disruption, reputational damage, and legal liabilities. This assessment then informs the prioritization of security controls, focusing on those that offer the greatest reduction in risk for the investment. Regular review and adaptation of the security strategy are also essential, ensuring it remains aligned with evolving threats and business objectives. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that during a penetration testing engagement, an ethical hacker discovers a series of vulnerabilities. The client has provided a broad scope for the test, but the specific methodology for assessing the business impact of these vulnerabilities has not been explicitly defined. Which approach best aligns with professional ethical hacking standards and the likely intent of such an engagement? Option A. Prioritize identifying and documenting vulnerabilities based on their potential to disrupt critical business operations and compromise sensitive data, and communicate high-impact findings promptly to the client. Option B. Focus exclusively on the technical CVSS score of each vulnerability and report all findings in a single, comprehensive report at the conclusion of the engagement. Option C. Proactively explore and test systems and data outside the explicitly defined scope to understand the full extent of potential business impact, even if not authorized. Option D. Assume that any vulnerability with a high technical severity rating will automatically have a high business impact, and report them as such without further analysis. The correct answer is A. Prioritize identifying and documenting vulnerabilities based on their potential to disrupt critical business operations and compromise sensitive data, and communicate high-impact findings promptly to the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking where the scope of an engagement is ambiguously defined, particularly concerning the impact of discovered vulnerabilities. The professional ethical hacker must balance the need to thoroughly assess risk with the potential for causing unintended disruption or exceeding authorized boundaries. The challenge lies in interpreting impact assessment beyond mere technical severity and considering the broader business and operational consequences, all while adhering to the defined scope and legal/regulatory frameworks governing the engagement. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured methodology that prioritizes understanding the potential business impact of a vulnerability within the agreed-upon scope. This aligns with the ethical hacker's responsibility to provide actionable intelligence that helps the client improve their security posture. By focusing on the business context, the ethical hacker demonstrates an understanding of risk management principles, which are often implicitly or explicitly part of engagement agreements and professional conduct guidelines. This approach ensures that findings are relevant and prioritized according to their potential to cause harm to the organization's operations, reputation, or financial standing, thereby providing the most value to the client. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely focus on the technical severity of vulnerabilities without considering their potential business impact. This fails to meet the client's likely objective of understanding and mitigating real-world risks. It can lead to an overwhelming list of low-impact technical findings, while critical, albeit technically less severe, vulnerabilities that could cripple business operations are overlooked. This approach can be seen as a failure to provide comprehensive risk assessment, potentially violating the spirit of the engagement agreement. Another incorrect approach is to assume a broad scope for impact assessment that extends beyond the explicitly agreed-upon boundaries of the penetration test. This could involve actively probing systems or data that are outside the authorized scope, leading to potential legal liabilities, breaches of contract, and damage to the professional relationship. It demonstrates a lack of discipline and respect for the defined engagement parameters, which is a fundamental ethical and professional failing. A third incorrect approach is to delay reporting potentially high-impact findings until the very end of the engagement, regardless of their severity. This can be detrimental to the client's ability to respond to critical threats in a timely manner. Ethical practice dictates that significant risks should be communicated promptly to allow for immediate remediation efforts, preventing potential damage. Failing to do so can be construed as negligence or a lack of commitment to the client's security. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a phased approach to impact assessment. Initially, understand the client's business objectives and critical assets. During the assessment, continuously evaluate vulnerabilities not just for their technical exploitability, but also for their potential to disrupt business processes, compromise sensitive data, or damage reputation. Always operate strictly within the defined scope of the engagement. If ambiguity arises, seek clarification from the client before proceeding. Prioritize reporting of high-impact findings immediately, followed by a comprehensive report detailing all findings and their assessed business impact. This systematic and client-centric approach ensures that the ethical hacking engagement delivers maximum value and upholds professional integrity. Question 16. Regulatory review indicates that following a critical system compromise, an ethical hacker is tasked with responding to the incident. Given the immediate pressure to restore services, which of the following approaches best balances the need for rapid recovery with regulatory compliance and ethical data protection? Option A. Immediately initiate a complete system rebuild without performing any prior analysis of the compromise to expedite service restoration. Option B. Conduct a swift, targeted impact assessment focusing on data sensitivity, system criticality, and potential for lateral movement to inform immediate containment and recovery strategies. Option C. Postpone all impact assessment activities until after the system has been fully restored, assuming the incident is resolved once functionality returns. Option D. Prioritize restoring system functionality above all else, deferring any consideration of data exfiltration or compromise until after services are fully operational. The correct answer is B. Conduct a swift, targeted impact assessment focusing on data sensitivity, system criticality, and potential for lateral movement to inform immediate containment and recovery strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the urgency of a critical system failure and the need for a thorough, compliant impact assessment. The pressure to restore services quickly can lead to shortcuts that bypass essential regulatory and ethical considerations, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks, including data breaches, legal penalties, and reputational damage. The ethical imperative to protect sensitive data and maintain operational integrity clashes with the immediate business need for system availability. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing a rapid, yet compliant, impact assessment that focuses on identifying the immediate scope of the compromise, the types of data affected, and the potential for further exploitation. This aligns with the principles of incident response and data protection regulations, which mandate timely assessment and mitigation of security incidents. By focusing on the critical elements of an impact assessment: data sensitivity, system criticality, and potential for lateral movement, the ethical hacker can provide actionable intelligence to guide immediate containment and recovery efforts while adhering to regulatory requirements for incident handling and reporting. This approach balances speed with due diligence, ensuring that critical decisions are informed by an understanding of the potential harm. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately initiate a full system rebuild without a proper impact assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the crucial step of understanding what happened, what data was compromised, and how the breach occurred. This failure to assess the impact can lead to the same vulnerabilities being present in the new system, rendering the rebuild ineffective and violating regulatory requirements for incident investigation and remediation. It also fails to identify the root cause, preventing future occurrences. Another incorrect approach is to solely focus on restoring system functionality without considering the data exfiltration or compromise. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Regulations like GDPR, if applicable to the exam's jurisdiction, though we are adhering strictly to U.S. frameworks for this example, and similar U.S. data protection laws mandate an understanding of what personal or sensitive data has been affected. Ignoring this aspect means the organization cannot fulfill its legal obligations regarding notification, mitigation, and potential remediation for affected individuals, leading to severe legal and financial repercussions. A third incorrect approach is to delay any assessment until after the system is fully restored, assuming the problem is resolved. This is a critical failure in incident response and risk management. Regulatory frameworks require prompt action and assessment following a security incident. Waiting to assess the impact after restoration means that any ongoing malicious activity might continue undetected, or that crucial evidence for forensic analysis could be lost. This delay also prevents timely notification to relevant authorities or affected parties as required by law, demonstrating a lack of due diligence and a disregard for compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should employ a structured incident response framework. The first step is always containment and initial assessment. This involves quickly understanding the scope and nature of the incident. An impact assessment, even a rapid one, is crucial to inform subsequent actions. This assessment should prioritize identifying critical assets, sensitive data types involved, and potential avenues of compromise. Based on this assessment, a risk-based approach to remediation and recovery should be developed, ensuring that all actions are compliant with relevant regulations and ethical obligations. Documentation of all steps taken, including the impact assessment findings and the rationale for decision, is paramount for accountability and future audits. The decision-making process should always weigh the urgency of restoration against the imperative of thorough investigation and compliance. Question 17. The control framework reveals a critical vulnerability in the customer relationship management (CRM) system. The vulnerability, if exploited, could allow unauthorized access to sensitive customer data, including personally identifiable information (PI) and financial details. The organization operates under a strict data protection mandate. Which of the following approaches best represents a comprehensive impact assessment for this scenario? Option A. Quantify the potential financial loss from direct theft of customer financial data and estimate the cost of notifying affected customers, while also considering the potential for reputational damage and the likelihood of regulatory fines for data noncompliance. Option B. Focus on the technical exploitability of the vulnerability and the potential for privilege escalation within the CRM system, as this indicates the depth of compromise achievable. Option C. Assess the impact based on the number of records that could be exfiltrated, assuming a worst-case scenario of complete data dump, without considering the specific types of data or regulatory implications. Option D. Prioritize the assessment of this vulnerability based on its CVSS score, as a higher score directly correlates to the most significant potential impact on the organization. The correct answer is A. Quantify the potential financial loss from direct theft of customer financial data and estimate the cost of notifying affected customers, while also considering the potential for reputational damage and the likelihood of regulatory fines for data noncompliance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in cybersecurity where a critical system's impact is being assessed for a new vulnerability. The difficulty lies in accurately quantifying the potential damage and ensuring that the assessment aligns with established regulatory requirements without over- or underestimating the risk. The ethical imperative is to provide a realistic and actionable assessment that guides appropriate security investments and response strategies, thereby protecting sensitive data and operational continuity. Professional judgment is required to balance technical findings with business context and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic evaluation of the potential impact across various domains, including financial loss, reputational damage, legal and regulatory noncompliance, and operational disruption. This aligns with the principles of risk management and impact assessment as outlined in cybersecurity best practices and frameworks. Specifically, for the certified ethical hacker v13 context, this means considering how a compromise of the identified vulnerability could lead to data breaches, service outages, or unauthorized access that violates data protection regulations, e.g., if U.S. regulations were implied, this would relate to HIPAA, GLBA, or state-specific breach notification laws. however, adhering strictly to the exam's unspecified jurisdiction. The focus is on the process of impact assessment as a core CEH competency. A thorough impact assessment informs the prioritization of remediation efforts and the development of incident response plans, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to mitigate the most significant risks. Incorrect approaches analysis, focusing solely on the technical severity of the vulnerability without considering its business context, is an incomplete impact assessment. This approach fails to acknowledge that a technically severe vulnerability might have minimal real-world impact if the affected system is isolated or contains non-sensitive data. Conversely, a technically moderate vulnerability could have catastrophic consequences if it affects a critical system holding highly sensitive information or controlling essential services. This oversight can lead to misallocation of resources and inadequate protection of critical assets. Ignoring the potential for regulatory fines and legal repercussions is a significant ethical and professional failure. Cybersecurity professionals have a responsibility to understand and adhere to the legal and regulatory landscape relevant to the data and systems they protect. Failing to consider these aspects means the impact assessment is not comprehensive and does not adequately inform the organization about its legal obligations and the potential consequences of a breach. This can lead to non-compliance and significant penalties. Prioritizing only the most technically complex or interesting vulnerabilities for assessment, regardless of their actual impact, demonstrates a lack of strategic thinking and professional responsibility. Ethical hacking and impact assessment are tools to improve security posture, not to satisfy personal technical curiosity. This approach wastes valuable time and resources that could be better spent addressing vulnerabilities that pose a genuine threat to the organization's assets and operations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach impact assessment by first understanding the business context and the criticality of the affected assets. This involves identifying what data is stored, what services are provided, and who the stakeholders are. Next, should systematically analyze the potential consequences of a successful exploit across financial, operational, reputational, and legal/regulatory domains. This analysis should be informed by the technical findings of the vulnerability assessment, but not solely dictated by them. Finally, the results should be clearly communicated to stakeholders in a way that facilitates informed decision-making regarding risk mitigation strategies and resource allocation. This structured approach ensures that the assessment is comprehensive, actionable, and aligned with organizational objectives and regulatory requirements. Question 18. Process analysis reveals that during a penetration test, a security analyst discovers a vulnerability that, on its own, does not grant immediate access to sensitive data. However, the analyst identifies that this vulnerability, when combined with two other low-severity vulnerabilities previously documented in the same system, could be chained to achieve full administrative control and exfiltrate critical data. The engagement scope strictly prohibits any actions that could disrupt services or access data beyond what is necessary to demonstrate the vulnerability. How should the analyst proceed? Option A. Report only the immediately exploitable aspect of the vulnerability, as the chained exploit falls outside the direct scope of what is immediately demonstrable without further steps. Option B. Document the vulnerability in detail, including the potential for chaining with other identified weaknesses to achieve administrative control and data exfiltration, clearly outlining the steps and conditions required, while adhering strictly to the engagement scope. Option C. Disregard the vulnerability as it requires multiple steps and conditions to exploit, and therefore does not represent an immediate, standalone threat within the current engagement parameters. Option D. Attempt to exploit the chained vulnerability to demonstrate the full impact, as this is the most effective way to convey the severity of the risk to the client. The correct answer is B. Document the vulnerability in detail, including the potential for chaining with other identified weaknesses to achieve administrative control and data exfiltration, clearly outlining the steps and conditions required, while adhering strictly to the engagement scope. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, where a penetration tester discovers a vulnerability that, while not directly exploitable for immediate data exfiltration, could be chained with other, less severe vulnerabilities to achieve a significant compromise. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate scope of the engagement with the potential for broader impact, and the ethical obligation to report findings that could lead to future harm, even if they require additional steps to exploit. The tester must exercise judgment in determining the severity and reporting requirements without overstepping the agreed-upon scope or causing undue alarm. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the vulnerability, its potential impact, and the steps required to exploit it in conjunction with other identified weaknesses. This aligns with professional ethical hacking standards and the implicit duty of care to the client. By providing a detailed report that includes the chained exploit scenario, the penetration tester demonstrates thoroughness and a commitment to uncovering all potential risks, even those requiring multiple steps. This allows the client to understand the full risk landscape and prioritize remediation efforts effectively, adhering to best practices in vulnerability disclosure and risk management. Incorrect approaches analysis. Reporting only the immediately exploitable aspect of the vulnerability, without mentioning its potential for chaining with other findings, represents an ethical failure. This omission can lead to a false sense of security for the client, as they may not understand the full extent of the risk. It also fails to meet the professional obligation to provide a comprehensive assessment of the security posture. Attempting to exploit the chained vulnerability beyond the agreed-upon scope of the penetration test is a significant ethical and legal breach. This unauthorized activity could lead to unintended consequences, data corruption, or legal repercussions for the penetration tester and their organization, violating the principles of authorized access and responsible disclosure. Ignoring the vulnerability entirely because it requires multiple steps to exploit is a dereliction of professional duty. Ethical hacking mandates the identification and reporting of all security weaknesses, regardless of the effort required for exploitation. This approach fails to protect the client's assets and exposes them to potential future attacks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to reporting. This involves understanding the potential impact of a vulnerability, even if it requires multiple steps or conditions to be met. The decision-making process should prioritize thoroughness, accuracy, and adherence to the engagement scope and ethical guidelines. When in doubt, it is always best to err on the side of caution and provide more information rather than less, ensuring the client has the necessary data to make informed security decisions. Communication with the client regarding the scope and reporting of findings is paramount. Question 19. Implementation of a penetration testing engagement for a financial institution has been initiated. The ethical hacker has received a verbal confirmation from a mid-level manager to begin scanning external-facing web applications. However, a formal written statement of work, detailing the scope, authorized IP ranges, and testing methodologies has not yet been finalized or signed by an authorized executive. The ethical hacker proceeds with the external scans based on the verbal agreement. Which of the following actions best reflects professional ethical hacking practice in this scenario? Option A. Begin testing internal network segments as well, as this is often part of a comprehensive assessment. Option B. Share the initial findings from the external scans with the mid-level manager to demonstrate progress. Option C. Immediately cease all testing activities and await formal written authorization before proceeding. Option D. Proceed with the external scans as verbally instructed, assuming the manager has the authority to grant permission. Correct answer is C. Immediately cease all testing activities and await formal written authorization before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for comprehensive testing with the potential for unintended consequences and legal ramifications. The professional challenge lies in navigating the complex landscape of authorized access, data privacy, and the ethical imperative to avoid causing harm or disruption. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are within the scope of the engagement and adhere to relevant legal and ethical standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes obtaining explicit, written authorization before commencing any testing activities. This aligns directly with the foundational principles of ethical hacking, which mandate that all actions must be sanctioned by the asset owner. Specifically, in the context of the certified ethical hacker, say, v13 curriculum, this emphasizes the importance of a formal statement of work, or a similar contractual agreement that clearly defines the scope, objectives, and limitations of the penetration test. This documented authorization serves as a legal and ethical shield, protecting the ethical hacker from accusations of unauthorized access or malicious intent. It also ensures that the client understands and accepts the potential risks associated with the testing. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with testing based on a verbal agreement or an assumption of implied consent is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates the principle of explicit consent, which is a cornerstone of data privacy regulations and ethical hacking standards. Without written authorization, the ethical hacker could be deemed to be acting illegally, potentially facing civil or criminal penalties depending on the jurisdiction's laws regarding unauthorized access to computer systems. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a disregard for the client's explicit wishes and legal protections. Another incorrect approach, such as testing systems outside the agreed-upon scope without prior notification and authorization, constitutes a breach of contract and an ethical violation. This can lead to unexpected system disruptions, data corruption, or the exposure of sensitive information, all of which can have severe consequences for the client and damage the ethical hacker's reputation. It also undermines the trust inherent in the client-professional relationship. A further incorrect approach, like sharing findings with unauthorized third parties before the official report is delivered to the client, is a critical breach of confidentiality and an ethical failure. Ethical hackers are bound by strict confidentiality agreements to protect the sensitive information discovered during testing. Unauthorized disclosure can lead to reputational damage, legal liabilities for both the hacker and the client, and a violation of data protection principles. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rigorous adherence to the following steps. 1. Thoroughly review and understand the engagement scope and authorization documents. 2. Seek clarification on any ambiguities or potential gray areas before commencing any activity. 3. Maintain constant communication with the client, especially if any deviations from the plan are considered. 4. Document all actions taken and decisions made throughout the engagement. 5. Prioritize the client's data security and privacy above all else. 6. Always operate within legal and ethical boundaries, erring on the side of caution when in doubt. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal that during a penetration test, a security analyst discovered a previously unknown vulnerability in a critical system that, if exploited, could lead to a significant data breach. The initial scope of the engagement did not explicitly cover in-depth exploitation of such vulnerabilities, but the analyst believes that demonstrating the full impact is crucial for the client to understand the risk. The analyst is considering proceeding with a limited, controlled exploitation to prove the vulnerability severity. Option A. Proceed with the controlled exploitation to demonstrate the vulnerability impact, assuming the client would want this information. Option B. Inform the client verbally about the discovery and the intention to perform a limited exploitation, seeking immediate verbal approval. Option C. Document the vulnerability and its potential impact in the final report without attempting any exploitation, as it falls outside the agreed scope. Option D. Obtain explicit, written authorization from the client to expand the scope to include controlled exploitation of the discovered vulnerability before proceeding. The correct answer is D. Obtain explicit, written authorization from the client to expand the scope to include controlled exploitation of the discovered vulnerability before proceeding. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in ethical hacking, balancing the need for thorough testing with the potential for unintended consequences and legal ramifications. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying and mitigating risks associated with a penetration test, especially when dealing with sensitive data and critical infrastructure. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the testing activities remain within the agreed-upon scope and do not violate any applicable laws or ethical guidelines. The correct approach, which involves obtaining explicit, written authorization for all testing activities, including any deviations from the initial scope, represents best professional practice. This aligns directly with the principles of ethical hacking and the requirements of many regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data privacy and cybersecurity. Specifically, in the context of the Certified Ethical Hacker v13, which emphasizes legal and ethical conduct, documented authorization serves as a crucial safeguard. It ensures transparency, accountability, and adherence to the principle of do no harm by clearly defining the boundaries of the engagement. This proactive measure prevents misunderstandings and potential legal disputes, reinforcing the ethical foundation of the penetration testing process. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with testing activities that extend beyond the agreed-upon scope without obtaining prior, explicit, written consent. This constitutes a significant ethical and potentially legal failure. It violates the trust established with the client and can lead to unauthorized access or disruption of systems, which may have severe consequences, including legal penalties and reputational damage. Such actions disregard the fundamental ethical obligation to operate within defined boundaries and respect the client's infrastructure. Another incorrect approach is to rely on verbal agreements or assumptions about the scope of testing. While informal communication is part of professional interaction, critical aspects like scope expansion must be formally documented. Relying on verbal agreements leaves room for misinterpretation and disputes, and it lacks the necessary audit trail required by many compliance standards. This failure to document critical decisions can be seen as a lapse in professional due diligence and a disregard for the importance of clear contractual obligations. A further incorrect approach would be to interpret vague statements in the authorization document as implicit permission to conduct broader testing. Ethical hacking demands precision and clarity. Ambiguity in authorization should always lead to seeking clarification, not to making assumptions that could lead to unauthorized actions. This approach demonstrates a lack of rigor in understanding and adhering to the agreed-upon terms, potentially leading to actions that are outside the client's intent and consent. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear step-by-step approach. 1. Thoroughly review and understand the scope of work and authorization document. 2. Identify any ambiguities or potential areas for expansion that require clarification. 3. Communicate any proposed scope changes or testing activities that deviate from the original agreement to the client in writing. 4. Obtain explicit, written authorization for any such changes before proceeding. 5. Maintain detailed records of all communications, authorizations, and testing activities. 6. If at any point there is uncertainty about the legality or ethicality of an action, err on the side of caution and seek guidance or clarification.